Dust poured into the valley like smoke, thin at first, then heavy, swallowing edges. The road cut through the basin in a long, obedient line, and the convoy followed it the way water follows a channel. Armored vehicles up front, cargo and comms in the middle, security elements strung out like beads, 1,000 Marines riding the rhythm of engines and dust. Then the valley snapped shut. Tracer lines stitched across the road in bright, hateful arcs. The first mortar landed short, an angry slap of dirt and shrapnel. Then the next walked closer, methodical, as if a hand with a ruler was marking distances. The air filled with a constant tearing sound, machine guns chewing the road, tearing into metal, ripping through air and bodies with the same indifference. Inside the lead vehicle, a young Marine slammed his fist into the radio panel hard enough to rattle the handset. Falcon Actual, this is. The rest dissolved into static. He tried again, voice cracking, requesting immediate air, immediate artillery, grid. Broken fragments answered him. A half-word, a scream, the sharp pop of someone else's transmission dying mid-sentence. Comms are jammed, someone shouted behind him. They've got the net. Overhead, a drone feed flickered across a screen in an operations trailer miles away. Grainy silhouettes, heat blooms, a snake of vehicles. Then the image stuttered and cut to black. The operators leaned in, jabbing keys, sweating. The sky, for them, went blind at the exact worst moment, like someone had severed a nerve. In the valley, mortars began bracketing the center of the column with cruel precision. One round landed near an ammo truck, and the blast threw men like ragdolls. Marines scrambled, dragging the wounded into shallow ditches that weren't deep enough to be safe, but were deep enough to feel like hope. A corpseman knelt in the dirt, hands slick, shouting numbers that sounded like prayers. A squad tried to break toward a low ridge line to the west. 10 men moving fast, heads down, rifles held tight. They made it 20 meters. Interlocking fire cut them apart. It was too clean, too planned. The enemy owned the terrain, owned the angles, owned the air itself. The road had become a trough. The valley walls were teeth. Back! Back! A sergeant screamed, pulling one of his Marines by the plate carrier. The Marine's boots dragged through dust that was turning dark. Near the center of the kill box, a cluster of Marines huddled behind a burning vehicle, their cover spitting sparks and heat. Enemy fighters, dark shapes, began moving in closer, using the smoke as a curtain. One of them sprinted, bent low, shouting to his team, arm pumping as if he could push the air ahead of him. The Marines behind the wreckage raised rifles, fired in short panicked bursts that snapped uselessly into the dust. Their magazines were half empty. Their hands shook, then crack. Not a machine gun burst, not the thump of a mortar. A single hard sound, sharp as a snapped branch. The sprinting enemy team leader folded mid-stride, as if an invisible string had yanked him backward. He hit the ground and didn't get up. The Marines blinked, confused. They hadn't fired that shot. Crack. An enemy machine gun on a rock shelf jerked, went silent, its gunner collapsing sideways. Crack. A rocket team that had just raised a tube to its shoulder fell in a heap, the weapon clattering into the dirt. 4-2 heartbeats. The chaos didn't understand what had happened. Then it did, because the shooting lanes changed, because the pressure eased just slightly like a boot lifting off a throat. Pinned Marines looked up through smoke, scanning the ridgelines, trying to find the source. There were no friendly sniper teams authorized in that sector. No overwatch that anyone had briefed. No air. No artillery. Nothing but dying daylight and the enemy's certainty. And yet those shots kept coming, rare, precise, impossible. A brief glimpse, far away. A mountain spur against the bruised sky. A lone silhouette behind a rifle. Calm breathing. A steady trigger squeeze. Another target dropping hundreds of meters below. On the radio net, what little of it survived, confused voices bled through static. Who the hell is firing? Say again, are we getting Overwatch? Negative, there is no. Somewhere in a dark operations center, a different voice snapped, cold, furious, controlled. Stand down. That position is not cleared to engage. as if 1,000 Marines being annihilated was a problem of paperwork. And somewhere above the kill box, the unseen shooter kept working, the sound of single shots cutting through the valleys roar like a knife. Because this wasn't the story of how a battalion was lost. It was the story of how two sisters refused to walk away. Earlier that day, the forward base had smelled like dust baked into canvas and diesel that never quite left your clothes. The battalion staged in the open, vehicles lined up beneath a sun that made the world look bleached and simple. In the briefing tent, maps were taped to plywood, grid lines, arrows, the clean geometry of control. Presence patrol, the staff officer said, tapping the valley route with a marker. Show of force. Keep the border stable. We roll through, we're seen, we roll back. Simple. Sergeant Nora sat near the back, still as a stone. Her rifle case rested against her boot. Her eyes moved over the map the way a hand moves over a scar, feeling what isn't written. Beside her, Corporal Hannah leaned forward, tablet balanced on her knee, stylus tapping in small impatient clicks. She waited until the officer finished his practiced cadence, then raised a hand. Sir, we've got repeating heat signatures along the west wall, here and here. She stood, walked to the map, and traced points that looked like nothing to anyone who wasn't trained to see patterns. They're not consistent with livestock or normal foot traffic. They appear, disappear, reappear in the same positions over several passes. The officer frowned like she'd interrupted a story he liked telling. Satellite is noisy. Heat blooms happen. Hannah's jaw tightened. It's not noise. It's structure. It's... A captain near the front turned, a quick glance sliding over the sisters like a label. This again, that was the stain. The whispered history that followed them from tent to tent. Nora didn't look away. If someone sets up interlocking fire on those slopes, the road becomes a kill box. A quiet shift moved through the tent. Half annoyance, half discomfort. The officer cleared his throat. We're not here to speculate. Intel assesses the route as secure. Hannah held her ground. Secure based on what? We've seen. Based on the fact the officer cut in that Higher has approved it. And Higher wants this kept clean. No cross-border incidents. No escalation. Then came the directive, delivered like law and like warning. You do not fire unless they fire first, and you do not cross that ridgeline. The ridgeline was marked in red, a political boundary drawn as if the land cared about ink. Beyond it lay higher ground, narrow, sharp spurs that offered commanding views, the kind of vantage points snipers prayed for. They were also off-limits, not because bullets couldn't travel there, but because paperwork could. After the briefing, the sisters walked the edge of the motor pool. Marines checked belts, tightened straps, joked in voices too loud. Everyone pretended it was routine because routine was a kind of armor. Nora watched the horizon. They're pushing us through like they want a photo. Hannah snorted. They want the photo to look like peace. Nora glanced at her sister. And if it isn't? Hannah didn't answer right away. She kept walking, fingers grazing the tablet case, as if touching it made the world more predictable. Then they'll tell us it was. Their assignment was clear, a small reconnaissance detachment, overwatch from Sanction Hill along the convoy's route. A place chosen by a map, not by a mind that understood how an enemy would think. On the approach march, Nora stopped once, pointing her chin toward a higher spur that rose like a broken tooth just beyond the red line. That's the angle. Hannah followed her gaze. Even from here, it was obvious. From that spur, you could see into the valley like looking down a throat. From the Sanction Hill, you could see only what the terrain allowed. Partial blocked, safe in the way blindness can be safe. It's a cross, Hannah said quietly. I know. They continued to the approved position anyway, because orders were orders, and because sometimes you had to obey long enough to prove you were willing not to. In their hide atop the allowed hill, they laid out gear with ritual precision. Nora's rifle, spotting scope, notebooks, a battered wind meter. Hannah's ruggedized tablet, a small antenna, spare batteries, and a coil of wire she swore she'd never need until she did. They worked in near silence, comforted by the familiarity of tasks that didn't argue back. Hannah slipped on her headset and began listening. The enemy chatter came in short bursts, coded phrases threaded through static like needles. Hannah's brows drew together as she caught a pattern. Words repeated, pauses timed. The net closing, someone said in a clipped language Hannah knew well enough to fear. Another voice, cargo in the middle. Hannah recorded it, tagged it, time-stamped it. Then she transmitted her report up the chain. The reply came back hours later, dismissive. Routine, chest thumping. Nothing actionable. As late afternoon leaned toward evening, Hannah noticed something else. Faint bursts of electronic noise, too intermittent to classify. It wasn't normal interference. It pulsed, stopped, pulsed again, like someone testing a blade before using it. She looked at Nora. They're probing. Nora adjusted her scope, scanning rock faces that looked empty and therefore suspicious. They're confident. Back at the operations center, a colonel signed the final authorization for the convoy route. He closed a folder with redacted pages, phrases like suspected external support, and training indicators smudged into black bars. His pen scratched like a door locking. As the first vehicles rolled out, Hannah wrote one last note in her log, the stylus pressing hard enough to leave an impression. If they're smart, they hit the column here. She marked the choke point. She didn't know yet that she'd just drawn the outline of a grave. Golden hour made everything look forgiving. The convoy entered the valley in neat spacing, dust trailing behind tires like banners. From the sisters' sanctioned hill, the column looked almost peaceful, a line of moving metal and tiny figures that might have been toys if you didn't know what a human body looked like when it stopped being whole. Nora watched through glass. No movement. Too quiet, Hannah murmured, listening to the air. The electronic noise came again, stronger now. A pulse that rattled the headset in Hannah's ear, then another, then a third. She straightened, eyes narrowing. Then the pulses flattened into a continuous hum. Low, oppressive, like a storm you could hear before you saw. Hannah's radio hissed. The battalion net blinked out. She tried again. Nothing. On the road below, buried charges detonated with sudden brutal light. The lead vehicle lifted, slammed down broken. Almost instantly, a blast erupted near the tail, sealing the column like a door slammed shut. Burning hulks became barricades. The road became a corridor of fire. Enemy fire erupted from ridges and ravines that had seemed empty seconds before. Machine guns hammered the center. Rockets arced into armor with shrieking trails. Mortars began walking in, precise, practiced, cruel. From a sanctioned hill, Nora tried to find targets, but the terrain cut her sight lines into fragments. Rock and distance swallowed the enemy positions she needed to see. Every angle she wanted was blocked by the valley's anatomy. This is why, she said through clenched teeth. This is why that spur. Hannah was already switching frequencies, fingers flying. They've blanketed the band. It's not just noise. She swallowed, forcing herself into calm. It's coordinated. Mobile, maybe. On the road, a round punched through the battalion commander's vehicle. Leadership fractured instantly. Junior officers shouted conflicting orders on local channels, barely cutting through the jamming. Marines ran and crawled and dragged each other into ditches that were too shallow, behind tires that were already shredded. In the operations center, commanders demanded drone feeds and air support. The screen showed static and a fuzzy horizon. The enemy had broken the eyes in the sky. Medevac denied. Someone said over separate clearer line. Possible anti-air on ridges. We're not putting birds into that. Down in the valley, that meant a simple translation. Bleed where you fall. Hannah leaned out of the hide, raising her small antenna, turning it in slow increments like a divining rod. The hum shifted slightly. She took a breath, steadying her hands. It's moving, she said. Jammer's not fixed. I think it's behind that ridge system, road network on the far side. Nora adjusted her scope toward where Hannah indicated, but the ridgeline blocked everything. So we can't touch it from here. Hannah's throat tightened. She tried to push another transmission through, using a narrow band she'd used once in training, a frequency that wasn't supposed to matter anymore. Static shooted up. Then, briefly, voices. Taking heavy grid. Hannah's eyes flashed. It could be pierced. If the jammer drops, even for seconds, we can get traffic through. She keyed her mic again, trying to report. Before she could finish, a command voice cut in, distant and brittle. Maintain position. Do not escalate. Do not fire across the boundary. Hannah stared at the handset like it had insulted her. Nora's face went still in a way that meant anger had gone deeper than heat. Through her scope, she watched mortars bracket the center again, watched Marines fold into the dirt, watched the kill box function the way it had been built to function. They're dying, Nora said quietly. We're being told to watch, Hannah replied, voice flat. Backup will solve it, the command voice insisted, as if time was a resource that could be requisitioned. Nora lowered the scope and looked to the right, toward the forbidden spur beyond the red line. The higher ground that would open the valley like a book. The only angle that matters is from there, she said. Hannah didn't argue the math. She could see it too, and she could also see the trap. Once they moved, disobedience would be undeniable. They'd be visible to any friendly satellite snapshot. Their careers, maybe their freedom, would be ash. Below, another mortar slammed near the ammo truck. Flames surged, licking upward, threatening to turn one hit into a chain reaction that would erase everything in a radius. Hannah's hands shook once, then steadied. If we stay, we'll be clean. Nora's eyes didn't leave the valley. And if we stay, we'll be complicit. Silence held them for a heartbeat. Fear on one side, function on the other. Then Hannah exhaled, long and controlled. Move. They packed fast, leaving behind just enough gear to make it look like they'd never left. An old habit born from being doubted. And then they broke from their assigned post and started toward the unapproved high ground, while the valley below burned like a warning. The descent off the sanctioned hill was the kind of movement doctrine hated. Loose rock, exposed angles, a slope that wanted to betray every footstep with a skittering cascade. They moved low, slipping through scrub, using the thickening dusk as cover. Each time a stone clacked, both sisters froze, listening for a reaction that might come from enemy ears or friendly sensors. Hannah's map was folded open in her palm, lit in brief flashes by a shielded red light. She traced a narrow ravine that hugged the boundary like a shadow. We stay below, silhouette. No skylining. Nora grunted, shifting the rifle case higher on her shoulder. The weight was familiar, but tonight it felt like it carried more than steel. Stray rounds snapped overhead, arcs of violence thrown high by chance. The enemy wasn't aiming for them yet, but the valley was a machine throwing fragments in every direction. A ricochet sang off stone, and Hannah jerked, stumbling. Nora caught her before she fell. Hannah's sleeve was darkening, blood seeping through where the round had sliced across her shoulder. I'm fine, Hannah hissed, teeth clenched, already pulling out a bandage with her free hand. Nora didn't argue. She tightened the wrap with practiced efficiency, then took more of the load, extra ammo, the antenna, the tablet case, until Hannah's breathing eased into something manageable. Smoke from the valley drifted upward, a rolling gray curtain. It would help conceal them from distant eyes, but it would also poison visibility, turning Nora's world into a shifting blur. Halfway up the final climb, Nora's rifle optic clipped stone hard. The sound was small, but Nora's stomach dropped. She checked it with fingers that didn't tremble yet. A crack spidered along the lens, catching the last light. The reticle still existed, but only cleanly on one edge of the glass. Her field of view had become a narrow slice of certainty and a wide smear of distortion. Hannah watched her sister's face. Usable. Barely, Nora said, but usable is enough. They climbed again, slower now, each step chosen. Hannah's breaths came shallow. Nora's legs burned. At a low shoulder before the final spur, Hannah raised the antenna and listened. The jamming hum grew louder, not in volume, but in presence, like standing closer to a generator. She turned the antenna, marked bearings in her head. There, she whispered. I think it's parked just behind that ridge. They crawled to the edge and peered down. The sight hit like a punch. A camouflage truck with an improvised mast sat near the edge of a village. Civilian-looking structures clustered like uneasy witnesses. Laundry lines, a low wall, lights that could have been family lamps or something else entirely. Hannah's mouth went dry. They're using homes as cover. Nora's eyes stayed on the truck. They want us to hesitate. The moral math arrived with ruthless clarity. Take the jammer, save the battalion's comms, but risk collateral damage if the shot went wrong. Miss, and the round might punch into someone's wall, someone's life. Hannah swallowed hard and forced herself into function. She pulled out the tablet, fingers flying through signals data, trying to confirm the truck was the source, trying to make the decision less like faith. A thin squeak broke through her headset, an emergency signal on a frequency she'd improvised with stubbornness and luck. Anyone mortar grid, please? It was faint, shredded, but human. Hannah's eyes flashed with heat. They're calling grids. If we open the net, they can adjust fire, coordinate movement, get the wounded out. Nora shifted into position on the spur. No sandbags, no nice flat dirt. Just jagged rock and a bipod that wobbled when the wind touched it. Hannah lay beside her, wounded arm braced against the rifle stock, turning her own pain into stability. Smoke drifted between them and the valley, thinning and thickening like a living thing. Crosswind tugged at Nora's hair. The cracked optic narrowed her world into a sliver. Nora studied the angle. The jammer truck was partly obscured by structures, wires, and the cruel geometry of not wanting to hit what must not be hit. There was a tiny gap, a line through smoke and space that would put a round where it needed to go without touching anything else. It was an impossible angle in any official sense. The kind of shot that reports later called luck, because admitting it was skill would raise too many questions. Hannah's voice was low, steady. Winds shifting. Wait for it. Nora's breathing slowed. Inhale. Exhale. The valley roared far below, but on the spur, the world narrowed to a heartbeat and a crack in glass. On your call, Nora whispered. Hannah listened one more time to the hum, one more time to the faint voices begging into static, and then she said, simply now. Nora's trigger squeeze was a slow decision, not a flinch. The shot cracked and vanished into smoke. For a half-second, nothing changed. Then the hum died. It wasn't dramatic. No explosion, no fireball. Just absence. The oppressive electronic presence that had smothered the air was suddenly gone, like a hand lifting from a mouth. Hannah's headset filled with chaos reborn. Actual, say again, we have comms. Mortar impact, grid, correction. Second platoon pin center, need. Fragments, yes, but fragments were enough. The valley's lifeline flickered back, thread thin but alive. Hannah keyed her mic, keeping it simple. Ridge Overwatch online. Send mortar grids. Prioritize machine guns. There was a pause, a breath of disbelief on the other end. Then a voice strained and urgent. Copy. Mortar observers at. Nora was already moving down a target ladder Hannah had helped build in her head, jammer first. Now spotters. Now machine guns. Now rockets. Anything that multiplied enemy force faster than a rifle could. Through the cracked optic, she found a figure on a rock outcrop. Still, watchful, calling corrections into a handset. Crack. The spotter fell backward, arms flung wide, as if surprised the sky had betrayed him. In the valley, the next mortar round landed wide. Pin Marines noticed. Heads lifted. Hope, thin, dangerous, enter the kill box. Nora shifted to a machine gun position, raking the convoy center. The gunner leaned into his weapon with confidence, tearing the road apart. Crack! The weapon stuttered, then went silent as the gunner slumped. The assistant tried to drag it back into alignment. Crack! He joined the first. Each shot was a small miracle with immediate consequence. A squad that could move 5 meters. A wounded Marine pulled behind cover without a second round finding him. A vehicle driver daring to reverse instead of freezing. Hannah relayed in clipped bursts. No long call signs. No speeches. Just directions that could be used under fire. West wall, second shelf. Rocket team. 2 bodies. A Marine voice answered, rough with adrenaline. Visual. Engaging. The enemy felt the change. Their fire paused. Not from mercy, but from confusion. A careful plan had been built on a strangled net and unchallenged angles. Now, something was dismantling it piece by piece from above. On a distant ridge, a spotter swept binoculars, searching for the source. Hannah saw him first, a glint of glass. "They're hunting," Hannah murmured. Nora didn't reply. Her focus tightened into a calm that looked like coldness from the outside, but was actually discipline wrapped around fear. She knew what happened to lone shooters when enemies had time to think. A small drone launched from behind enemy lines, buzzing like an angry insect. It climbed, searching for muzzle flash, for movement, for anything that would make the spur visible. Hannah's fingers danced on the tablet, tracking the control link by feel and pattern. Drone operator. 2 o'clock of the ridge fold there. Nora found the figure holding a controller, head tilted up. Crack. The drone wobbled, lost purpose, and spiraled down into the rocks. Almost immediately, mortars began to walk toward the spur. First short, then closer still. The enemy didn't know exactly where the shooter was, but they knew the general truth. High ground was killing them. Rock chips sprayed Nora's face. Dust filled her mouth. She blinked, grit away, and kept firing, each shot slower now, more deliberate. Not because she had time, but because she refused to let fear take her hands. "Climbers," Hannah whispered suddenly, voice tight. She pointed to a shadowed gully. Dark figures were moving upward, using the terrain with terrifying competence. "They planned for this," Hannah said, equal parts awe and dread. Of course they had. This ambush was not the work of amateurs. It was a machine with redundancy. In the valley, with machine gun fire thinning and mortars growing less precise, a company commander seized the opening like a weapon. He shouted orders that finally made sense, pushing vehicles into gaps, forming a temporary strongpoint behind rock cover, pulling wounded and critical equipment towards something defensible. Hannah caught the word that mattered in the chaos. Aircraft. "They're on station," a voice said. "Need mark. Need a clean mark." Air support was there, but blind without a target they could hit without murdering friendlies. Hannah scanned through smoke and distance, looking for the enemy node that held the ambush together. A command truck, a cluster of radios, a figure who moved like authority. "There," she said, voice strained but sure. "Near the bend. Vehicle with antennas. And a man, standing, gesturing, controlling timing." Nora's cracked optic made the shot a gamble. Smoke drifted. Wind tugged. The commander was partially obscured by chaos, a dark shape among dark shapes. Hannah keyed the mic, talking a lieutenant below and allaying smoke in a position that aligned with what they saw from spur. "Pop smoke 10 meters left of the burned-out vehicle." "Yes, that one." "Hole." A bloom of smoke rose exactly where Hannah needed it, a crude but effective landmark. Nora used it like a compass. The enemy field commander stood to shout orders, arms slicing through air. For a second, his face turned toward the valley as if he could will the kill box back into place. Nora exhaled. Crack. He dropped mid-command, the body collapsing in a way that looked almost polite, like someone sitting down too fast. Hannah didn't celebrate. She transmitted, calm as if reading weather. "Enemy command truck, same cluster. Strike that node." The aircraft rolled in, their roar arriving a heartbeat after their shadow. The strike hit the designated point with precise violence, the blast punching light into dusk. Enemy coordination fractured instantly. Their side of the valley went uneven. Some fighters broke contact, others fired erratically, timing gone, confidence leaking out like air. But the climbers kept coming. They were close now, too close. Hannah's wounded shoulder throbbed. Her ammo count was low. She did quick math and hated it. "I can't hold them," Hannah said, voice thin. Nora's eyes never left the gully. "We don't have to hold them. We just have to finish them." Hannah pulled out her last few rounds and fired into rocks. Not to hit, but to force heads down, to make the climbers pause and look the wrong way. Then she grabbed a stone and threw it hard into a different patch of darkness. The climbers turned, instinctively tracking sound. For a moment, their bodies entered Nora's narrow remaining field of view, the only clean edge of cracked glass. Nora fired. One climber folded, then another, each shot spaced by a breath, each breath dragged back from panic by sheer will. The lead climber tried to rush, desperation replacing skill. Crack! He fell. Nora's last magazine felt heavier than the first, as if each remaining round carried a name. Dust coated her lips. Her shoulder screamed. Her hand shook, just barely, then steadied again. Below, Marines surged forward under the cover of collapsing enemy fire, fighting their way toward an exit route that hadn't existed minutes before. Vehicles lurched, wounded were hauled aboard. Rifles barked in disciplined bursts. The kill box, once perfect, now had cracks wide enough for men to crawl through. Hannah listened to the net, to the frantic gratitude threaded through commands. We're moving. We're moving. Cover left, go, go. She shut her eyes for 1 second, letting relief hit like a wave and then passing through it, because relief was dangerous if you let it stay. When she opened her eyes, the dusk had deepened. The spur was quiet except for distant impacts and the far-off roar of engines moving again. Nora lowered her rifle slowly, like setting down something alive. For the first time since the ambush began, the valley sound changed. It no longer sounded like annihilation. It sounded like survival. Dawn arrived pale and indifferent. The valley, once a line on a map, was now a wound. Burned-out vehicles sat like skeletons along the road. Spent casings glittered in dirt. Marines moved among wreckage with the quiet efficiency of people who couldn't afford to feel everything at once. Marking bodies, lifting wounded, counting the living with eyes that looked older than yesterday. On the ridge, a rescue element found the sisters where the spur narrowed into nothing. They looked smaller in daylight, 2 figures wrapped in dust and bruises, dehydrated, nearly out of ammo. Hannah's shoulder was a stiff bandage. Nora's optic caught the sun and showed its crack like a fault line. A lieutenant crouched beside them, staring at the rifle as if it was a myth given shape. You two, you were the Overwatch. Nora didn't answer with pride. She answered with fatigue. They were dying. In a makeshift field hospital tent, Hannah lay on a cot while a medic checked her wound. Beyond the thin fabric, she heard snippets of conversation that made the night's truth sharpen into a clearer knife. They weren't just trying to kill us, someone said. They were going for the secure comms vehicle. The encryption keys. Region-wide sensor data. They wanted to blind us for months. Cargo in the middle. Hannah turned her head, eyes closing as the phrase clicked into place with bitter satisfaction. Later, in a dim room that smelled like stale coffee and sealed decisions, the sisters faced a panel of officers. The language was cold and clinical. Unauthorized movement, engagement across a sensitive boundary, disregard of explicit orders. Each accusation was a stone placed on the table. Nora listened without blinking. Hannah, pale but steady, answered when asked. She didn't plead. She didn't apologize. She offered facts, grids, timing, the simple math of lives saved. A major cleared his throat. You understand what you risked. Yes, Nora said. We also understand what was being risked down there. Someone on the panel shuffled papers. Casualty figures. After-action notes. Testimony from surviving company commanders. The numbers didn't lie, no matter how much the institution wanted them to be quieter. Then the truth about their prior black mark surfaced, dragged into the light like an unwanted witness. An earlier operation where the sisters had refused a flawed plan that would have put civilians into a kill zone. Political blowback had followed. Careers had been bruised. The sisters had been labeled difficult, not because they were wrong, but because being right had been inconvenient. The official report that followed was careful, sterile, protective of reputations that needed protecting. It spoke of unattributed fires from elevated terrain and unexpected degradation of enemy command and control. It buried names beneath phrasing that kept optics clean. Off the record, a few leaders shook their hands quietly. Marines who had crawled out of the valley saluted them without words. Respect and resentment coexisting in the same gesture, because their disobedience had forced the institution to stare at its compromises. Weeks later, in a supply cage, Nora's bloodstained sling and cracked optic hung like ordinary gear, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what those fractures had held together. And somewhere inside the sisters, the same truth stayed solid, heavier than metals and sharper than reprimands. They had been ordered to look away. Instead, they found 1,000 reasons to keep watching.